I'm going to call the meeting to order and turn it over to Ken, if you guys are okay with that, to get it started. Okay, thank you. And it's 6:02 for the clerk. Oh, yeah, that's me.
Okay, so there was an intention of doing a deep dive into a draft, and I've made some edits to the draft, but it's definitely not in the place to share it widely. I think the biggest thing that I wanted to do with this particular meeting, because our community meeting will be the discussion that we have with regards to the strategies, is to take a look at the strategies that you have listed in the 2011 plan and looking at them and looking at the way that it's presented and utilizing that as kind of a starting point, considering, I'm just going to share my screen, considering
Do you have that permission?
the fact that
There you do.
we haven't done anything, or I don't know if the town has made any large just
Strides.
So
Also word strides, yeah.
Yeah, so any steps towards these particular strategies to increase the amount of affordable housing. And this is the way that it should be presented, because this is what you need to come up with in a housing production plan, are the strategies, and the way that your 2011 strategies have been presented include, the process by which you do it, as well as who would be involved. Similar to the master plan, similar to other plans, which the open space plan, which requires you to identify the groups that would be involved. More than likely, it would be either the select board, the housing authority, or the planning board, if it's regulatory in nature. But I guess, the thing that I really wanted to gauge with regards to this joint committee is to understand where the town may be, where you all may be, in the interest of keeping them as strategies. I think that the way that they're presented, it's still presented in the master plan in similar language. So I think that that's why there's the alignment, and that's why that I'm suggesting to almost use all of these strategies the way that they're in. Obviously, we're going to refine, because the town has, adopted an inclusionary zoning bylaw. Obviously, now you need to figure out how to amend it, or review and refine. So I was, just going to go down the list. And I think the way that I've seen other housing production plans present the strategies are the way that you presented it here in this plan, which is you have these very different programming type issues. So outreach, partnership, and support, programmatic and identification of parcels that you may want to look into, and then the regulatory action. Janet.
Yeah, I'm sorry. As the clerk of the meeting, I see an iPhone person here. Could I ask them to identify themselves for my minutes?
Apologies, it's Joy Piper.
Oh, hi, Joy. Okay, great. Welcome.
Ken?
Yes.
Can you zoom in a little bit so the text is a little bigger?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So these still exist in your master plan. And I took a quick look at your website and under Housing Authority, and I couldn't find anywhere else if there would be those types of affordable housing resources. And I don't know if you have the answer to that, but this still exists as a strategy in the 2011 plan, and doing a quick survey of your town website, I didn't see anything.
So what would an example of that be? Just like a link to Wayfinder? Or?
Yes, a link to Wayfinder is a link to those types of resources, any funding sources.
Okay.
And I think we're going to have a discussion on programmatic ways to use CPA funds. So if, for instance, the CPA fund were to create or even utilizing CDBG funds. Let's say that you are successful in getting a CDBG fund money to help support home modification loans or something like that. Where would those resources be?
Hi, I'm sorry. What does CBDG stand for?
Community Development Block Grant.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah, so that's administered through the Department of Housing and Urban Development. And oftentimes those are specific to, it probably is not likely in your community based on the high area median income or the median income for the town. However, the 2011 plan suggested that in 2009, you may have explored with PVPC the ability to get some funding to help support maybe some of these home modifications through a fund of sort. And that's spelled out currently in that, and that's what I'm suggesting. Just stay in there, and we'll figure out if since 2011 and 2020, if there's been any success in working with PVPC on that type of, being able to acquire that type of money from the federal government.
I want to say one thing.
Yeah.
I like what it says already. I kind of just want to reorder them in priority order.
I think that's great. If there's priorities, and what I was planning to do with regards to this is not necessarily present. I wanted to present this after doing an exercise at the community development at the community meeting to literally prioritize in real time. The ideas, the various strategies we've identified here under these particular subsections. So what I imagined was that we had a poll similar to what we did at the last meeting, where under outreach, partnership, and support, we've come up with these 3 particular strategies. And if there are some additional ones, we add it. If there are ones that we want to move here, we add that. And then that would, give the group an idea of the thought about prioritizing, those particular strategies. Janet?
I'm sorry, Ken, just another logistics thing. I should have said at the beginning of the meeting, so my apologies. Just to announce that this is the October 28th, 2021 meeting of the Southampton Housing Authority and Planning Board Collaborative Group for Housing Production Plan. Just to be on the record, sorry.
No, thank you.
Thank you.
So, Dan, was it more so the language of the particular strategy, or was it the order of the way that the strategies are presented?
I think the language is fine. I think that we have discussed a number of these items, and I think based on our discussions, maybe back when they had originally done it, this is the order they put these things in. And maybe it may have been prioritized, but I think it would be good for us to look at this list and prioritize it, because I'm always about making lists, prioritize the list, start at the top of the list, and you work your way down, right?
So we're still in outreach, partnership, and support, Dan. Is that the part you're talking about?
Well, maybe you take the larger sections. Do you think that programmatic identification would go before outreach and support, or regulatory actions would go before that?
The segments themselves. Okay.
Yeah.
I think Sierra, what did you say?
I said it looks like they were just alphabetical and not in priority order.
Yeah, and I think it's a good tool to put it in priority order. We did that with the master plan implementation report. Well, at least drawing attention to the ones that are short term. And that may be the case for this one, right? But at the same time, I think that my intention was utilizing the community meeting to maybe even not dwindle down, but go through each of these strategies in whatever, however we want to present that, and then talk about how to either prioritize or how to, make one stronger than the other. But I think that was something that I wanted to do with the plan, because that wasn't the way that it was presented necessarily in the original plan. So again, I think, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of these strategies are aligning with your master plan. And I didn't necessarily identify any new ones other than in the regulatory section, particularly because these are typical, and these are typical of other communities that have accepted housing production plans and have approved housing production plans with these previous ones. But with the regulatory ones, it's ensuring that also, if the planning board is going through this review process with their consultant, if they're possibly going to be looking at certain areas of the bylaw which may or may not, suggest or may not address affordable housing in any way, that would be good to know as far as the context of those changes. So I don't know if for these first three, if you have a thought on the way that it's presented. Each of these will receive a page or two of the strategy, of the context by which we've arrived at these strategies. Again, it will reflect the data that will be collected from American Community Survey and whatever is up to date with the 2020 census, but and then some of the survey responses. But yeah, Sierra.
Because I'm obsessed with the housing trust idea. I see that here we call it a land trust. I feel like we should keep our language consistent so that people know what we're talking about. So can we call it a housing trust or affordable housing trust?
I mean, I see both things listed. So I was going to ask the question, is there a difference between a local land trust and a housing trust fund?
Yes, there is a difference. And I wanted to bring that up. So I actually pulled something.
Sierra and I are thinking alike here.
Is a land trust in regards to like acquiring open space and conservation?
Not necessarily conservation, because you can utilize that for other means. Sometimes it's used for economic development tools and housing. Oh man, I already.
Okay.
But there is a difference. The housing trust fund is specific to housing, but the community land trust, I think, and I had a great page that I had pulled.
So you can't buy land with a housing trust fund to build on. Is that what you're saying?
You can, but I think the mechanism is different, and they're two different types of tools. Where's that? Because the housing trust fund is also municipal, whereas the community land trust is nonprofit. So I think that may be a big distinction here. So this is what a community land trust is. And so there are 277 across the United States. And this was in your plan. And I don't know if this is something that the housing authority or any town boards have looked at before.
Question.
But, yeah.
Is a community land trust, does it only encompass one municipality, or in some cases, do they encompass multiple, like say regional land trusts?
I haven't seen any. I think the examples, because I wasn't as familiar with it until I saw it in your plan, and then digged a little deeper. The ones that I found in Massachusetts are all community based, so it is within a singular community.
Okay, so I was going to say, like, maybe there's one that's already around us we could join, but
yeah, I think because it does have this interchangeable, or this thought that when you think of land trust, you think of conservation, and that's more like your kestrels or your your other types of land trusts that may exist in the area, and those span multiple communities. But I think with regards to community land trusts, it is specific to a community.
So is this still a priority for us?
That's a question. It's a strategy. Is it a priority? I don't know.
And can we, as I mentioned before, can we change the language so where it says land trust, can you call it a community land trust, like with capitals, and where it says housing trust fund, can you change it to just housing trust?
Yeah.
Those are like the language we're using now.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I agree that just going to priorities and just, it seems like there's a lot of things on here that are all good, but like you said, Ken, this is kind of the list that's typically in a plan like this. And I think that the most important thing isn't necessarily coming up with new things. I think everything's probably here, but we're not going to do all 12 of these in the next, say, 3 or 4 years or whatever. I mean, I don't think it'd be great, but I don't know that it's realistic. So I think maybe even more than just reordering them, like somehow formatting this, like to pick 3 or whatever it is that like are our strategies. And then other ideas that if they come up later, maybe could even be classified as something different. But I think that having a summary of strategies this long, I look at this and I don't even know where to start in a way. Do you know, like?
I think that you bring up a great point. And I think one of the important things that can happen here, and this is, master plans and open space plans, it's like sometimes pie in the sky. I think housing production plans, maybe there is a sense of reality with regards to the way that some of these strategies are presented. And I think, Sarah, you bring up a great point. Maybe even just choosing the top 3 for these various, subheadings. I think keeping track of the ones that may exist, either in a separate document or elsewhere in the document, in the appendix, can be something that, is there. But because I think the housing authority and the select board or planning board, if housing is rising to the top as a main concern, the way to address it is by utilizing your housing production plan. And if you have some manageable strategies, making an effort to do them. So either through prioritizing with the help of the community through that exercise, or even working with this group and just saying, maybe we shouldn't, maybe we should bring forward certain strategies and just ensure that those are the strategies that the community finds valuable.
Can we format it like the master plan where it's like short-term, long-term, longer term?
Yeah, so my intention was to, because there are these separate sheets that suggest, the action steps and the various things, putting it into a matrix. That's always helpful. And doing that. Because more than likely, no one is going to read this. They may refer to it when they look at the matrix for the strategy, but I think you bring up a great point of just the way that it needs to be presented. So the intention was to put into a matrix similar to your open space plan and your housing plan, or the master plan, and then draw attention to those various separate columns.
So Ken, have you commented in the past that the HPP kind of is good for 5 years?
Yes.
So, so, I mean, long-term plans are great, but if we have to redo this every 5 years, I mean, maybe we should stick within what we can accomplish in a 5-year term or begin. And I don't know what other people think, but if this is, again, a live document that updates every 5 years, as long as PVPC works with us with a grant to do it, then I'm just thinking, yeah, the shorter term.
And I think, I mean, because these particular strategies also are listed in the master plan, so this is going to remain part of the town's documents no matter what. I think the housing production plan is helpful, for the purposes of affordable housing, but also because a master plan is not shared with the state unless you're like getting a grant and you're attributing certain aspects of the master plan and sharing that with the state. This is approved by the state. So you want to ensure that, I mean, you obviously, if you want to put 13 items on here, you can, but I think the state probably wants to see what the town is looking at. And I think showing that they want to, or the town wants to maybe prioritize certain, maybe even keeping it down to 10 types of big strategies and trying to move on them, may be better. I don't know.
Like I'm looking at like identify park and ride locations throughout Southampton. I'm like, how does that even help affordable housing? What?
Well, the suggestion is that, if you're near employment centers, let's say, because your residential village zone, that was identified as a possible 40R district, but the possibility of that leading to maybe additional density along those corridors, something like that.
I think it's a stretch. So
I mean, I don't know what the thinking was back in 2011 or 2010.
And the one above, and I have a question about the one above it. Lower the threshold for existing senior property tax work-off program. So if a senior enters the tax work-off program, does their house or the property they're living in then fall under affordable housing?
No.
So that doesn't help either.
It just gives them an opportunity to be able to stay in a home and make it more affordable.
Which is
I mean, it makes it more affordable, but
which is great. But if I'm focused, if I'm laser focused on creating affordable housing in Southampton, I think 10 and 11 are like kind of. I can't make the leap. It's hard for me to make the leap to that.
I think, if you can, and that's great. I think that you've identified that that's important, but, I think housing production plans not only are for how to create affordable with a capital A, and those are your subsidized housing inventory, but it also is the lowercase a. You want to allow for seniors to continue living in the town. You want to, maybe have younger families move into town, figuring out that they can possibly afford it. I think it's good to contextualize those particular strategies. However, appear in the plan.
I kind of go back to Janet's point of this is a 5-year plan, and if I want to say what do we want to get done in 5 years, we want to build capital A affordable housing, right? Focus in on getting that achieved, and then you get your capital A.
I don't think the housing authority would agree with you, Dan.
Really? Why not?
In lieu of, I think we want to make both a capital A and lower A. I think that's in the couple years I've been on it, and Sarah, correct me if I'm wrong, it appears that both of those are key to allowing younger families to reside in Southampton, and also to provide a place for really affordable housing to exist.
Yeah, I think that's true. And, considering how housing prices are just skyrocketing, it's like there's a really large gap between capital A affordable and like what's actually available. So there's a huge amount of opportunity there.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, what are you referring to? What is capital A and capital B? Am I missing something?
So we were talking about, with regards to capital A, the capital A affordable housing are the additional housing units that would make you meet the 10% affordable housing quotient that the state wants all the communities to have. Southampton currently is at 1.4. It will go down once the new census data is handled by the state, because there are some new housing units since the 2010 census. The lowercase a are the values of providing housing to those that don't necessarily fall into the capital A. So those that wouldn't necessarily qualify for, any sort of HUD related programs.
Sorry.
So Ken, like our starter and finisher homes we were talking about.
Oh,
Yeah.
Welcome.
And, and the thing is, the charge of the housing authority is the lowercase a. So knowing that, I think, it's important just to contextualize, I think, some of the strategies to Dan's point, because some of them are not necessarily going to lead to, new affordable units under the umbrella of what would be acknowledged as a subsidized housing unit.
Can I ask you to go back for a second and repeat that? I just want to, I clearly heard what you said.
Sure.
The direction of the housing authority is to develop lowercase a versus uppercase a.
Upper.
I'm asking Ken, Jim, what he said. I thought I heard him say the opposite.
I was reading the mission that's like in your town website.
Mm-hmm.
And so the town website, and I'm looking at it now, says the mission of the Southampton Housing Authority is to monitor the town's affordable housing needs. That's lowercase a.
Lowercase a. So,
and to help design and implement plans to increase affordable housing within the town. Lowercase a.
If I could just comment on that, I don't think. I think when we made that mission statement, we weren't conscious of an uppercase or lowercase. I think if you ask, the purpose of a housing authority is to create more uppercase affordable housing in town. But I think, this is a personal belief. I won't speak for the housing authority, but personally, I think we need to create more housing units along that continuum, uppercase and lowercase.
Yeah.
I don't think we should be exclusively, but I think the charge of a housing authority, if you ask the state, is to create uppercase affordable housing.
We need to correct our mission statement then.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
I mean, I can't tell you that, but I think you should. That's the suggestion.
Like Jim said, I don't think we were sensitive to the upper lower at the time that was probably put out there. So
I wasn't even aware that anyone else was either, to tell you the truth.
Well,
so.
I mean, I think you're
someone reading that and saying, "Oh my God, they're not working on 40B," or
yeah, right.
Well, and the thing is, I think too, obviously this is going in another direction, but it does say later in that mission statement, in accordance with housing regulations established by the DHCD. So, yeah, I guess maybe you can make that leap to suggest that it's for affordable housing, subsidized housing units. But I think everyone is right in that, your other town documents suggest that there are other tools to allow you to plan for lowercase a along that continuum of, the various value points, and to address, where you are currently in your inventory of homes, and what the trends are. And that's what a housing production plan does. I think where, and I'm just going to mark this in yellow. Where we arrive, Jim, is to look at the strategies that have been established under the 2011 Housing Production Plan, utilize them, maybe refine them, but also use them in the community meeting when we do some engagement through poll exercises, to prioritize and or find ones that may not make sense anymore, and do an exercise based on that. I think that
I think number 9 fits into that category as well, right? If I almost want to look at this as like, what is to support that we're calling lowercase a versus what is to develop the uppercase A. Number 8 seems uppercase A, so I put it at, to me, I think.
I'm sorry, Dan. I'm sorry. I just want to hear Ken finish his thought before I'm sorry. Go ahead, Ken.
Yeah. So I think what I was just going to say was that the way that we're going to convene the community meeting would be to prioritize and do some exercises around goals and strategies, identifying things that already exist in your 2011 plan that haven't been acted upon or can be refined even further. Obviously, you've made some strides in reaching out to agencies and others to gain more knowledge regarding things like the Housing Trust Fund or some of these other ideas. But I think what we've arrived at too is to maybe even make the list smaller, to create strategies that are more realistically implementable within a 5-year plan, because this has to be updated every 5 years. I think being able to document what is currently in here and put it elsewhere in the plan, either in the appendix or elsewhere, within the goals and strategies, is important. But I think the way that we present it to the community and to the select board, to the planning board, which has to approve it, and the state, is to come up with strategies that, are maybe limited to 10. But I think we'll end up at that point once we, as a group, figure out which ones may currently still need to be in here or can be moved to that, area where we don't know where we're going to put it, or utilize the community meeting to make those determinations or confirmations. I think, one of the things, and it's always good to have the planning board here because a lot of the housing production plan does come up with strategies that are regulatory in nature, and identifying that the town has an accessory apartments bylaw, which I didn't necessarily know, but that is a possibility to increase subsidized housing inventory. It's a little harder and it doesn't really make sense, but it's an option. But I don't know if the planning board members that are on this call, if there has been a discussion with your consultant regarding this particular bylaw to make it even more open or less restrictive, because right now it's pretty restrictive.
I would say we'll start our conversations with our new planning consultant, and we haven't had that conversation yet.
Okay.
So,
because I feel like because he was the town planner in South Hadley, that he may be coming up with certain comments regarding accessory apartments and the way that you currently have it in town. Obviously, there's new housing legislation, which if the town chose to amend this particular bylaw, it would be easier to pass rather than a 2/3 majority. It's a simple majority for accessory apartments. Anything related to housing, to a certain extent, could be passed with a majority. So that may make it
We
easier.
should definitely bring that up to Paul Demon, the chair of select board, because he's
we
very
should bring
interested
that
in
up.
getting them Also, I thought Housing Authority was going to be meeting with Planning Board to go over some of the bylaws.
That's what we talked about when Sierra had sent me an email. We should talk about that tonight. Next, at our next meeting, which is next week, we are going to talk more about how we're going to move through these updates. We're not necessarily reviewing a specific bylaw next week, but we are going to talk about how we're going to move through the process. When the bylaw review was first started a couple of years ago, the accessory apartment or the two-family dwelling, was updated slightly, that each dwelling must have a minimum of 750 square feet. So there have been some things with that looked at that haven't been passed yet. But anyway, the idea with, we're talking at the planning board meeting next week about how we're moving through this. And then Paul Demond is aware that, when we get to some of these certain zoning bylaws, that the Housing Authority would like to be involved in that review. So if any of you would like to come, we are still meeting in person with masks in town hall. So that would probably make sense. But
you're not there yet. So that's,
Right. When you're there, we're
this first, right? Yeah.
Well, and I think what will end up happening too is your planning consultant, because you utilize your planning documents, your town planning documents, as a guide for what you may or may not be changing, will probably look at your master plan and see that, there's this longstanding comment for fixing accessory apartments, or the longstanding comment with regards to the inclusionary zoning bylaw, right? And then I've identified some other strategies, looking at the cluster development, clarifying apartments in the mixed use district, and maybe looking at 40R. There are requirements for 40R, but is it worthwhile to have 40R as a goal or a strategy when the town, may be ambivalent towards any sort of increase in town infrastructure? I don't know. Or,
Educate an old man on what a 40R is.
So, luckily I didn't close that one. So I should have those.
Yeah,
First of all, Dan, that's my line. You're much younger.
I was going to say there are no old men on this call, so I don't know who you're wasting your time on. But
So let me share this screen. So this is in the CHAPA documents. So I think you either talked to MHP or CHAPA. I can't remember when you were talking about housing trust funds, probably MHP. But CHAPA also has a lot of resources on housing. And these are your requirements. And your master plan has suggested that this is a possibility. It's also listed as a strategy. You have to have an eligible location with existing infrastructure. You need to have adequate infrastructure. Your eligible location based on the density, because there was a mapping exercise for this minimum density criteria, suggests this is the area right by Pomeroy Meadow. And then there's these other requirements of the way that a bylaw would be written to support 40R. What's the benefit of 40R are, these monetary benefits for, that you get from the state, and then incentives for development, for housing development by developers. Obviously, there's a lot of overlapping pieces that you need to have that momentum and that literal hand holding throughout the entire process that you may have with your planning consultant, because he was able to adopt 40R in his community. But that is something that still exists in your master plan. and could still exist here, but it wasn't necessarily as prioritized in the housing production plan as it was with supporting documentation in the master plan. So that's the gist.
So does this require a bylaw, Ken? Yeah, so,
It requires a sewer.
well,
Requires
it's,
infrastructure. And the thing is, it's the discussion about infrastructure that I've been around, Southampton long enough that there is definitely I don't know if there's a stance or there's this idea about infrastructure. But if, the town were to adopt this type of district with the intention of creating affordability, there would need to be some sort of, addressing of infrastructure.
Right. We've talked about tying into Easthampton and the pluses and minuses and even the availability of that. That's not guaranteed, but
Right.
We have one big apartment unit here. So, there's Uber septics. I don't know how well they work but
yeah.
Anyway.
So
it
that's
also says transportation, which we really don't have in town, so.
yeah. Let's see. And then the other strategy I think I have here is infill development. So when I say infill development, that's like your vacant properties that may be non-conforming for certain types of homes. Having some sort of system to address for those types of housing where you may have smaller homes on those particular parcels. Some communities have utilized that or created incentives. Those are your habitat homes, homes that you would develop with those types of entities. So is that a strategy that could be possible? Knowing, the audience that you may need to persuade in order to change bylaws.
Ken?
Yeah.
Actually, this might be more for our planning board members, but something that I think we need to be really careful with, whether it's cluster or, looking at using lots that are currently not valid, infill. I think we have to be careful that and I don't know if this is possible, as we create zoning, that it restricts square footage of the unit that can be placed, because I think what we're seeing play out in Northampton is rather frightening. They're creating more housing on smaller lots, but they're not creating affordable housing on smaller lots. You just have very big houses close to one another. So I don't think we want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we need to make sure, if it's possible, if it's legal, that the new zoning regulations make that clear.
Mm-hmm.
And so I defer to our planning board reps who know this or can pursue this to just be aware. That's all.
Jim, I think that's a very good point. I don't really have an answer, but I think definitely something to keep in mind as we move forward with this. Because I agree with you. That's definitely not the intent. I don't think it's what anybody wants in town, to have bigger houses and littler lots. Maybe somebody, but not the majority.
And when I was in North Carolina, I witnessed developments. They were probably, cluster developments to create or save open space, but they essentially recreated villages. So they put large or expensive homes really close to one another, created a little town center, a little public meeting space.
Did you go to the villages, Jim? You're describing the villages in Florida. Is that where you went, or is that something?
No, it was in North Carolina.
Oh, in North Carolina, yeah.
In
It sounds just like
Pittsburgh.
the villages, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think this is not a new thing, and this was 20 years ago. But my point is, and those houses people loved it. They didn't mind being really close to one another. They liked that kind of community. But I think the purpose there was to save open space. But my point is, you can put a big house on a small lot. We can't just create smaller lots and hope that's going to okay, people are going to build smaller homes. I don't think we should assume that.
No, we should assume the opposite.
I mean, and I think, bringing that to the attention of the planning board is important. I think the way that had been explained within the discussion of cluster housing in your housing production plan is to address just that. And so it's looking at dimensional regulations and maybe looking at the types of development that would be allowed in a cluster zone, in a cluster development. Also, the requirement of having already 30 acres of land, does that deter developers from utilizing that particular permitting process?
Right. And I would just, add to that, there might be different purposes for different parts of town. And the more open space areas of town, you might have a zoning district for cluster development to save open space. And if it fulfills that function there, but in more in town, closer, you want to do infill and maybe cluster, but the purpose is not to save open space because there's not much to save. Mm-hmm. You're creating affordable housing.
Yeah, that's a good point. So I think just to, reiterate the intention of presenting these particular strategies, and I will, I think, clean it up and share those ideas with you with regards to how they should be presented on a PowerPoint when we do the exercise, and maybe eliminate some, I don't know, because I think as Dan had suggested, identifying park and ride locations throughout Southampton doesn't necessarily, speak to, indirectly it may, but doesn't necessarily speak to, I think, what the intention is of this housing production plan. Janet?
Yeah, were there any other regulatory actions that came up in the community meeting, the first community meeting, that aren't addressed in these three?
Well, I think, and what I'm gathering, and I don't know if the committee feels the same way, there was the discussion of cluster development that I think came loud and clear to take a look at that, ensuring that maybe you fine tune the calculations of open space and or changing some of those dimensional regulations, setbacks, and whatnot. But the appetite for actually changing or creating new zoning districts, I don't know if there is, based on, some folks who wanted a whole housing moratorium. That's not going to happen, but how do you address, or how do you present? And the thing is, we can, but I don't think the data necessarily through the survey supports creating smaller lots, or suggesting the creation of smaller lots elsewhere in town. I think the low-hanging fruit are the ones that have been identified here, and also confirmed, I think, through either alignment with the town documents or, the survey data. I obviously really want to suggest that two-family homes be, allowed everywhere without a special permit. But is that, is it worthwhile to go through that exercise? I don't know. I don't think it was identified in any of the documents, other than as in the master plan, the suggestions coming from, your consultants. It was PVPC in 2012 to look at that, and doing another survey where it suggests that, majority do not want that, definitely don't. Do you still want to go through the process? I think that it could be a good idea. And maybe even putting it under, let's say, I put this as a suggestion, as a poll question or a poll option, and then say, to contextualize it, things like looking at the cluster development again, looking at 40R, and then describe what a 40R is, looking at infill development. Oh, and then also looking at other places in town where you may want to make the lot size smaller to allow for certain types of housing to be built there, or allowing for a two-family home elsewhere in town without a special permit and by right.
Ken, I'm really going to advocate for that last one, because everything I read seems that's like the easiest and most productive thing any town can do. It's simple, and you just allow two families anywhere if you really want to get serious about creating more affordable housing. So, survey aside, I don't want to ignore the survey, but I personally would like to push that, because I think there's a lot of we can gain a lot of benefit housing stock by allowing that.
Agreed.
I guess why do we stop at two families? Like, I don't know. I used to live in a triple decker apartment, and it's great.
I think that I do think there'll be more resistance to going up to full multi 3, 4, 5 family. That does start to change the character of it. I mean, it just does, whether or not you think it's good or bad. I personally think two family is a great idea, and I think that it could be more easily sold to some degree, because
it still maintains the character of the town, which is part of our ethos or goal.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Right.
That's my opinion. I don't know others.
Well, I think, Sarah, if you look at our housing stock too, I don't know if there's some big houses, but they're not the kind of homes that you would want to make into a 3-family, but a sprawling farmhouse maybe, but I'm just guessing, most of the homes in town, the older homes that would be workable, for example, as a 2-family, would be a 2-family. It'd be a stretch to make a 3, it seems. That's
true. I agree.
And is 2-family necessarily guaranteed to be affordable? So I guess that's, how do we?
It's not, but it's going to, I think we need to encourage it, and logically it's going to be affordable because you take one home and you make it 2. You allow, for example, someone to age in place. If they live in a farmhouse in a rural part of town, they want to stay there. If they're allowed to make a 2-family, then they can rent out the other half and stay in their home. And by definition, that's more affordable for them. I think that's how you make it work. So and whoever is renting is paying rent at a somewhat reasonable rate versus.
Okay. So would that include like the accessory apartment, like being allowed to build an accessory apartment to a house for like an in-law suite or whatnot?
No, that would be that's it. Separate. I think there's always confusion between the building code and the zoning code. Especially when it comes to accessory dwelling units, accessory apartments. The accessory apartment would still be within the context of the single home. So it is, at least according to the zoning, would be within a single family district. However, because the way that your zoning bylaw is currently written, it's within the home, with separate entrance, separate kitchen, but it's also owner occupied. And I think that there are specific code requirements for building code when you have 2 separate, like a 2-family versus a 1-family with an accessory unit. And I think it's just the way that the nuance of it, because you have the accessory apartments that are currently allowed in the town, and to my knowledge, and based on this plan being written in 2011, 2010, and the master plan also saying the same thing, no permits from 2007 to 2012 have been issued for accessory apartments. So
no one's gotten a permit for an accessory apartment? Is that what you're saying?
That's according to the town documents. I haven't followed up with the building inspector on that particular one, but maybe the planning board has seen permits or the ZBA has seen special permits for those types of uses, because that is required. But I also know that in my experience, many times municipalities have them all over the place and there's no permit, for them. And it's just, they're operating however they're operating, and the building department hasn't come and seen it. And it's just there.
So my question to you then is, based on your experience in reading our accessory bylaw or accessory apartment bylaw, do you think it's because no one is, requesting permits, putting aside maybe they're doing it without actually requesting a permit, but like, why aren't they? What is restrictive about that bylaw? It's too small, this area?
The requirement is small, yeah. So it's like 600 square feet maximum. Some communities do 900 square feet as the maximum. The state actually has identified that as the maximum for an accessory unit. However it's written, it is still kind of restrictive. Requiring them by special permit is restrictive because there's always the chance for a denial. And then, your current zoning bylaw also says they have to be owner occupied. So there's a process by which, the applicant, if they're coming to the reviewing authority to get a permit for an accessory unit, would need to go through a process that required like recording at the registry of deeds that this is an affidavit that I will be living here full time. And this person that I am renting or letting live there in the accessory unit is a family member.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
And an upstairs to a garage, is that considered an accessory apartment? Just for my own clarification.
According to your bylaw, it wouldn't be allowed because it requires an attached product to the main home. So, they may be existing in Southampton, and because they're existing elsewhere, I know that, units above garages are oftentimes used as an accessory dwelling unit, but sometimes they're not permitted. But I don't think that based on your bylaw that would be permissible.
Well, there's something to fix.
Yeah, I mean, we just saw it on Conservation Commission. I don't know if Dan was on it, but there were issues, not issues for Concom because we didn't care, but we noticed that people were living above garages.
Yeah, so I was just looking at our current bylaw for the accessory apartments, and the owner has to live in one of the two, but the owner doesn't have to live in both. But the limit is 600 square feet currently.
Yeah, I misspoke when I said that
Okay.
it needed to be a family member. There's other communities that require family members to live there.
Yeah, the owner has to live in one,
Right.
Of either the apartment or the house.
But it has to be attached.
Attached. So then, do we have a bylaw for detached like a detached dwelling on the property?
Like a tiny home?
Like a tiny
Yeah,
home,
sure.
or like if you have a detached garage. So in the example I brought up before, it was a detached garage with someone living above it.
Yeah, it's not a tiny home, right?
I don't think we speak to that.
There's lots of opportunities, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of people doing it. It's just not either in the bylaws or they just haven't gotten permits for it because it's restricted.
Right, if a forest falls in the tree and no one's there, or a tree falls in the forest, no one's there to hear it. So, it's just not enforced. But to Ken's point also, again, that's also what I'm reading in addition to expanding where you can build, a duplex or a 2-unit home is accessory apartments, 900 square feet, 800 square feet even makes a difference. And 600 is pretty small. And so looking at that also will open things up.
Will we be considered a green community if we have a whole village of tiny homes for affordable housing?
That's my dream.
The tiny home village.
That's my dream.
Could we even do that with our bylaws right now? Could you build a village of tiny homes?
No, you would have to craft that in the bylaws. You would have to do that. The
Well,
planning
there you
board
go.
that's in charge of the planning board.
So that's a regulatory action that we could list as a way. If
Well,
we're adding to this list, not to
what
point
I
my
also
foot.
think, though, Dan, is because you say, adopting a small home bylaw rather than saying exploring a small home bylaw, or something to explore the development of small homes, tiny homes in Southampton, I think is more palatable than saying that you're going to go ahead and change the rules.
What's the difference between saying that and saying like allowing like what do they call it, like an RV park?
Well,
right?
RVs in its nature are temporary.
Oh, what am I thinking of? Mobile home parks.
Mobile home?
Trailer park.
Trailer park.
Yeah. Which is affordable housing.
Yeah. I mean, there's another option, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
So, yeah, I mean, we see if mobile homes are addressed in your bylaw. So I think the intention of utilizing this particular number 14 and whatever it's going to be renumbered to as a question. And then within the context of my discussion or on a slide, suggest that, there are particular rules or certain regulations that, may be updated or that should be updated, and then getting some sort of quantifiable support based on, those polls. What I think could also be helpful is splitting up, going into this and then having separate questions for each of the bylaws.
Because revising the bylaws is not very definitive as to how, or is it open-ended intentionally? Because it would include two-family houses, it would include tiny homes.
Right. It's a strategy. And that's, strategies that I use in working with communities where, you saw the survey, no one wants apartments. Like 60% don't want apartments or that type of housing. And, there's also another line in that says they want larger lots. So how do you draw, not draw attention to that? It's, it's a strategy. But at the same time, I think it could be helpful for the planning board to pursue these particular rules and regulations if, they so to choose. And if there's appetite by the residents and then present in your plan.
So I always go back to that is data of people who already live here. Mm-hmm. Where when do we gather the data of the people who want to move here?
I mean, I think that obviously there's always a challenge to that. It's like, how do you, other than having a survey that's open and, are you going to say,
like neighboring communities, what's preventing people who wanted to buy a house here mm-hmm. from buying a house here, and what type of house would they have purchased if they could have? Because people here already have their house. Mm-hmm. They're going to say, I want a house that's just like mine.
Well, I think you also, obviously you're not necessarily going to use all of that to support your advocacy work. You obviously also have the regional housing plan. You can also discuss adjacent communities. I mean, you're like between Easthampton, which is growing, and Westfield, right? So, and Holyoke. So there is a lot of growth that's happening, maybe a lot slower, but there is still growth. And as I mentioned, Southampton in the past 10 years is the largest out of all the 43 communities in the Pioneer Valley has had the largest population growth. So if that says anything, there are some certain trends that, you may want to, draw attention to.
I would also add, Dan, I think you got a good point. How do we get that voice? But we have to be the voices for the people in town who, the seniors who are looking to downsize, for the first-time home buyers who grew up in town who want to stay. They may not necessarily be represented in that survey results, which show, no one wants apartments, for example. But they're a voice. These people exist, and we need to bring them out. And also the children of people who are, to your point, satisfied in the home they're in. How about their children? Are they going to be able to live in town when they grow up? Maybe they're school age now. In 10 years when they're not, can they afford to live in town? To me, these are the talking points we have to reinforce.
And, I think we'll be around even after we submit this plan and work with the community to adopt it. If there are some things that you identify that you could use this additional assistance, that's definitely something that would happen through, discussions with PVPC. So I think that there obviously are these particular strategies which are low-hanging fruit, and drawing attention to the ones that you think are easily implementable that will support the intent of what a housing production plan is, I think is good. It's good for civic education and engagement, but at the same time, drawing attention to the needs that you currently are having, and that you have, and knowing that you're a growing community. And, there's going to be certain things that you're going to need to address. So I think going to work off of these to come up with some polling questions. Also, either, and I haven't yet identified what a breakout session would look like, but I imagine it would be goal and implementation related, and maybe that is where we discuss this rather than the poll question. But what I plan to do is have that PowerPoint for you based on this conversation, and how to use Jamboards to do the same type of engagement. So with that said, I think with the particulars of this particular plan, I'm still working on making sure that we have the 2020 census data in here, also looking at the surrounding communities, making sure that we put into context some of this. The data is the data, and it's not necessarily changing any of the strategies. So it's a presentation of the data, and I just want to make sure that I have the right sources and I'm utilizing the most up-to-date. So I'm not as concerned about the presentation of the data than the strategies, which is probably the more important part. So that's where I am with the draft. And I'm still waiting for certain data sets that I wasn't able to get. There was this conversation about the the maps. Let me pull up those maps. So in the community presentation for the first meeting, I ended up changing that slide to a zoning map just to draw attention to there are specific areas of town that have specific requirements or standards for development of housing. But the housing production plan also suggests that there be a conversation or a presentation of mapping that shows parcels that may be utilized for the development of affordable housing. I think it was Sierra that had the question at our last meeting with regards to some of the criteria for the developability of, which I learned is not a word. I
like it. Just go.
I love the word, but there are certain criteria that lead to these parcels being colored the way they are. And I just received the document today. I wasn't able to parse through it, but it is all mapping related. And so there are like overlap of certain data sets through the department, DOER, the Department of Revenue, rather, that have established these particular parcel layers to create these certain colors. And it also relies on the assessor data that's reported to the state for the different types of parcels that are identified. I think the goal and the tool used, because we did this, or this was done in the 2011 plan, was, let me pull that up, identifying parcels in town which either this committee or the town has talked about for potential areas of development. There's going to be a presentation of this map, as well as a quick table about developable land versus potentially developable and undevelopable, just because that is a requirement of the housing production plan when you talk about private property. There are town-owned property and town-owned properties. Does he have that? No. So this doesn't separate town-owned properties versus private property. But I don't know if you recall, in the 2011 plan, there were some identified parcels for development. And I don't know if this is something that still is discussed, or if this was utilized within the silo of a housing production plan. The development of another community plan, the 19-acre town-owned site on Moose Brook Road, which could be deemed for a development of 40 to 60 units of affordable housing.
Trying to figure out where that is. Are we talking about the transfer station?
Yeah.
We're going to build it on the landfill.
Yeah.
Former.
That's a plan.
I can't imagine what that is.
Yeah, because there's nothing beyond strong that I'm aware of. I mean, because
right. So Moose Brook continues beyond Strong, right, up to
I walk that
middle,
with the dog sometimes, and I don't see any town unless
if it is, that's part of that road's dirt, right, between Strong. Yeah, so that's
too far past Strong.
Talk about infrastructure.
But there are houses being built up in that area.
Oh yeah,
on the dirt road. So those weren't town owned. 19-acre. I'll have to take a look.
Well, I mean, generally, I think when we talk about town-owned property, and this is the case in some of the other communities that, don't necessarily have a lot of town-owned property, it's taking in tax title through a foreclosure process, inventorying that, and then either utilizing the housing authority or a housing trust fund to identify parcels that make sense, maybe.
We've kind of done that, Ken, amongst us, and there's not a lot that's.
Do you have that inventory? Because I think that's important to present.
I can send you a document that I have.
I think that would be great to at least present in this section, rather than just this description of what would happen during a tax taking.
Because I mean, it's most of them. Well, they divide you on just by tax that foreclosure.
Well, I think whatever you have, I think if this discussion has already taken place, it's good to present in the plan. And I think what could also be helpful is if if it's an identifiable parcel that I can have our mapping person map, we can put that on a map.
There was a 5-acre parcel on Middle Road, was probably of all the parcels that our town owned, for instance, that have any frontage, and I don't know how buildable it is, but I went through it with the assessor at the time, and we whittled it down to just a couple. So,
Can I say something about the Middle Road property?
yes.
So I've been thinking about that kind of a lot lately, and I don't know if it's too small a thing to mention in a plan of this size, but I think there's like a key next step that's so complicated that nobody is taking it, which is like there's already been a site evaluation, but someone now needs to figure out how we can build or develop there without going against the wetland bylaw. So we need like some kind of surveyor or someone to come in there. I think we just like it's hard to know what the next step is, and so it's just like stalled, but like it could potentially be a place for us to build, and it would be nice to have something that would encourage us to take the next step, like putting it in the plan.
Do you still have a letter from that to share with Ken, Sierra?
Yeah. Yeah, if you think that'd be helpful.
Yeah, can't hurt.
Yeah, I think that's very helpful. Obviously, if there are next steps involved with that particular property, especially if there are some environmental concerns, to identify that within the draft or within the plan. You've taken that step to identify a parcel, and you've also taken the step to identify what needs to happen if that parcel were to be considered for affordable housing. So that's good. And that would be helpful. So I think if Janet, you have that
I have
spreadsheet or whatever you have.
Yeah, I have an Excel sheet. I mean, some of it was just so small, the frontage was not even considerable. Then Sarah had the letter that came from, I guess, the assessor's office. I probably have it somewhere, but she could send it to.
I'll forward that right now.
Okay.
Here's a question for you. Does the housing authority get included in the ability to purchase properties with the right of first refusal that comes up for the town?
It's a select board, I think. I mean,
I don't think the housing authority has that authority.
Okay.
If you got a redevelopment authority.
Conservation, Dan.
It's only conservation would have the ability to take advantage of that.
Yeah, because it's pertaining to Chapter 60, I think.
Anything.
61.
It's
61A. I mean,
ABC.
There's 3 different categories, but
yeah, so that's very like statute driven. Why conservation gets that right of first refusal.
Yeah, and so this reminds me of a particular instance where we did the master plan for the town of Blandford, and they had protected land. I think it was 61 or 60. I don't know. But they were having a conversation among the various committees that parcel could be used for affordable housing development. Where obviously before, if it was under the agricultural exemption or under Chapter 61, its main focus was preservation for the purposes of agricultural use. So I know that they're currently having conversations about that because they are looking to develop affordable housing, and it's a town parcel. Or no, it's not a town parcel. They've acquired it.
I mean, I don't know that it's mandatory that it goes to conservation, but typically it's in that kind of environment, whether or not it could be something that's used for affordable or not.
Yeah, I think it has. I don't think it has to go to conservation, but I know the scheme is that in regards to the taxes. So the town itself, not conservation, but conservation gets notice of it because usually they have the CR on it, I think.
I mean, it's in chapter, so it's owned by the The assessor's office is involved. The planning board's usually involved. Conservation is involved. They all kind of do a thumbs up, thumbs down for the select board, and the select board makes the final decision, I think.
I know why Dan is bringing it up though.
But I mean, then the town has to vote on it at the end, so. Yeah, it's chapter 61, 61A, 61B, so.
It's always something to keep in mind.
Yeah. So I think, we probably, because we have the meeting scheduled for November 18th, same time, I have a poster that I can send to you. And I can print some out and have that for you Monday, Janet, if we want to do another drive.
Yeah, I may try to mail things to the realtors in town that reside in town, because I know we talked about that, so.
Yeah, I think, and I think if you want to maybe explore some additional engagement, I'm happy to talk about that, because I'm in the town of East Long Meadow, where I'm also having 2 community meetings with them. There was an ask to have a specific engagement with seniors. So if you want to maybe navigate a separate meeting, probably virtual, with developers or realtors to kind of, and obviously we need to figure out what the content of that meeting would look like, and what would you want to take away from that. But I'm happy to have that conversation if that's something you think could be helpful, even more helpful. The goal of the community meeting on the 18th is to talk about implementation and talk about strategies. The first meeting was a presentation of data and talk about, and inventory the various values, utilize the Jamboards, present that when we set the scene for, how we're arriving at the implementation strategies, in addition to the survey, in addition to other, ways that we've collected data over the past 2 years. So this meeting is specific to implementation and strategies that will be shared. But what I imagine is that before that meeting, you'll have all of the data to review, in addition to just some refined, some of the language that we had initially discussed with regards to the strategy, and each of those pages which outlined a process that will be refined, in addition to a matrix that will also be part of the plan. And that should at least cover the first meeting, the content of the first meeting, and what else needs to be present in the plan. But I don't know if there were any thoughts about things that you wanted to take away from the community meeting. I'll share with you a proposed PowerPoint, probably sometime next week, based on utilizing the strategies that we've kind of looked at. But I didn't imagine it, anything else being part of that community meeting, unless you think that there should be something that we need to address. But yeah, from here until the end of the year is you looking at a draft, and we're going to go through the process where you send me edits and I'll change it. And if we need to schedule meetings in between that, we can do that, to talk about certain edits if the committee doesn't like the edits or whatnot. But that's how I imagine the rest of the years to go. After the second meeting, that really we'll be able to take whatever information we get from that to put into a final plan. But in the meantime, you'll be able to see what the draft plan looks like, and you can post if you want that. But I imagine that's how I was imagining the last few weeks of the year. And if I need to go to the first 2 weeks of January, I will. So I'm not going to leave you hanging. This is going to go to the DHCD. It's going to get approved, and then I'll say, okay, you guys have a plan. But that was my thought process with regards to this. And I'm glad that we had this conversation about the strategies, because that was important to identify that. And then I got those additional resources, and I'll get from Janet that Excel spreadsheet, because that's going to be important to include in the plan. but I don't know if anyone has anything. But that was kind of my intention for this evening.
So should we just defer from, if once you get the handout done, Ken, our previous layout or our previous marketing strategy responsibilities? Is that?
I think that's fine.
I'm happy to help Sierra put the sign up. Or do it myself if you want.
Anyone answers me. They've all been ignoring me, but we'll talk about that at the Housing Authority meeting.
When is that meeting? Your Housing Authority meeting?
November 8th, 6 o'clock.
I just want to apologize because I know at Tuesday's meeting I said this was a Housing Authority meeting. I apologize. It's because when I went to go look it up, it says Housing Authority.
Yeah, Joy, it has to say, because we have a quorum, so it has to be listed under Housing Authority.
Yeah. No, but it is I apologize that I did say tonight was a Housing Authority meeting and not the Housing Production Plan meeting. So I will make sure I'm correct next time.
They wouldn't let me make another group.
Does the committee want to meet before? I don't know if we need a full meeting before the community meeting because we kind of get the hang of it. I'm hoping that maybe we could utilize the folks that did the breakout rooms if we need to do breakout rooms again to do that. But maybe we can do earlier than 6. Like, I don't know if you want to meet the day of and just like spend an hour before we have the meeting, or if you want to schedule some hour or even a half hour to kind of walk through that. You'll get to review the PowerPoint, but I don't know if it's going to be if we need to do like a practice or a meeting prior to that.
So that was my question too. I was going to ask the group, Ken, are people feeling comfortable just jumping into the 18th? I'm not necessarily. I think it's always good to review and make sure. Even to your point, even if it's a half hour or if we need an hour prior or a separate date, but I'm a little anxious. I'll just share. It's just me about just going into the 18th without any prep.
I agree. I'd like to meet maybe, the week before, a couple days before.
Do you have a planning board meeting that Wednesday, the 17th? Is that a planning board meeting?
I don't see anything scheduled on the site yet for the 17th. For the 17th. But it doesn't mean it's just not posted, could be part of it.
Right. I possibly have something going on the 17th. It's not set in stone, but I've reserved a spot in my calendar. Sorry.
No, that's fine. So I'm trying to think. I don't have Tuesday available. Monday, I may have available, but I think that's select board meetings.
No, Tuesdays are select board meetings.
Tuesdays. So. Oh, okay.
Monday the 15th, you're saying?
Yeah.
I mean, if we were ready to talk on Monday the 8th, I don't know about Dan, or Ken, I'd be available to jump on the Housing Authority meeting for half an hour or whatever.
So Monday, the 2nd and 4th Mondays are usually, I have standing meetings.
Oh, right, okay.
And I was able to somehow attend at the last meeting. I don't know. I mean, it's possible that it might be a light agenda, but I'm also meeting in person in that community, so I wouldn't necessarily.
No, that's fine.
Okay.
What about the idea of just having Ken hop on at 5:30 that day? Anyone who's feeling nervous can sign in anytime and do a little overview, and just doing it all Thursday the 18th.
That's fine.
So are we going to have a pre-registration like we did the last time?
We didn't have a pre-registration.
Not a pre-reservation, but
the little emails. I can do that again for sure.
Reminder email. I mean, was it worthwhile to have it? I mean,
We had like, what was it, 9 people on there? I think
Yeah.
so. It's, an option to give people a reminder. Why not?
Good.
I mean, the poster's also going to have that. It's going to allow, people to still add their emails, because I have that link on there. So they can still, add that if they want.
Yeah, I'll include the emails. I'll include everyone on from the first list. Like maybe I will just, I think that form will still work. Well, I'll just have to update it with a new date. But I'll just add it to the same list, and anyone who was on the list before will still be on it.
Now, you can test it with me if you want, since I'm on it.
Okay.
So Sierra, does that link still work?
The link should work. Just right now, it says housing committee meeting on, or housing production plan meeting on, and it has the date from the last one. So I just update it before you show anyone. We'll do that.
So I'm sorry. I'm just feeling a need to be concrete here. I don't know if we decided with the pre-meeting. Is the 18th like at 5:30 for those an open hour? Did we decide that was going to work?
I don't think we decided, Jim. So
not that we need to have a vote, but and that'll work for me. Does it not work for anyone? Maybe that's easier, because that's a good suggestion. Okay. Thank you for entertaining that thought. Well, here's a question to follow up to that. Will the link we create for 6:30, can we just use that link?
Yeah. So what I did at the last meeting, because I know some of the committee were there first, I just let you guys in first, because I have access to the waiting room. So just as people come in and I see all your names, I'll just let you guys in for that.
You're very kind that way. Perfect. Okay, folks. Are we at a point of calling it a night, or it's gotten very quiet?
Motion to adjourn.
Good.
Are we going to do official motions? I guess. Sounds like there was a motion.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Actually,
Kane, aye.
yeah, we need to do a names. We'll make
Simmons,
it official.
aye.
Oh wait, I'm on the planning board. I don't have
Yeah,
to.
it's just
Steeny eye.
Well, we're glad you're in agreement, though.
Yes, we are glad, Dan. You're so used to saying, let's get out of here and adjourn. Yeah. So
I
that's
was just trying to. I
unanimous.
was facilitating.
Yes, and it worked. All right. I think we're in a good place. I thank you all for your patience. Sorry I was late. Thank you, Planning Board. Thank you
all.
Thank you, Select Board Rep, and thank you, Ken.
See y'all soon.
Thank you. Enjoy your dinner, everyone.